I was working Christmas night, the kind of shift that always feels longer than it should. The roads were empty, businesses dark, houses glowing faintly through the trees like they were trying to hold on to warmth. Snow had been falling since dusk, not heavy, just steady enough to soften everything it touched. Tires sounded quieter on the asphalt, radio chatter felt farther away, and every sound inside the cruiser seemed too loud. My own breathing, the click of the turn signal, the heater kicking on and off. I'd been a deputy long enough to know that when things get that quiet, it's not peace. It's waiting. Just after midnight, the radio crackled. Dispatch's voice came through calm, routine, reading off a call that didn't make sense. A woman on the line, whispering. Address incomplete. No house number, no cross street. Just a road name I recognized and an area I'd patrolled for years. Dispatch tried to get clarification, but the caller wouldn't respond to questions. She just kept saying, please, under her breath, like she didn't want to be heard. The line stayed open, filled with a faint sound I couldn't place at first. It took me a moment to realize it sounded like breathing. Slow, shallow, close to the phone. I acknowledged the call and started driving. The farther I went, the worse the snow seemed to get, even though it never picked up on the windshield. Trees crowded closer to the road, their bare branches reaching overhead, closing me in. Mile markers slid past, but something felt off about them. I'd glance at one, drive what felt like a long stretch, then see the same number again. I told myself it was fatigue, that Christmas shifts mess with your sense of time, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the road was looping without my permission. Dispatch checked in, asking for my location. I told them I was en route, still looking for the address. As soon as I finished speaking, another voice came over the radio. Not dispatch, not static. It was the woman. Clearer now. She asked why I was taking so long. Her voice wasn't panicked. It was tired, almost disappointed, like she'd been waiting by the door and heard a car pass without stopping. My hands tightened on the wheel. Dispatch said nothing about her speaking again, which meant they couldn't hear it. The road narrowed ahead, pavement giving way to packed dirt I didn't remember being there. I slowed down and pulled into a small clearing, more of a widened shoulder than a proper pull-off. My headlights swept across trees and brush and stopped on footprints in the snow. Bare feet. No shoes, no socks. The prints were small, uneven, like the person had been cold or hurt. They led straight into the woods. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Someone wandering drunk. Someone lost. That's what the job trains you to believe. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The cold hit harder than I expected, sharp and immediate. The snow absorbed the sound of my boots as I followed the prints between the trees. The woods felt wrong. Not threatening exactly, just hollow. No wind. No animals. Even the snow seemed to fall straight down, untouched. After maybe 30 yards, the beam of my flashlight caught something that made me stop dead. There was a front door standing alone in the clearing. White paint, peeling, with a brass knob dulled by age. No walls. No porch. Just a doorframe planted into the ground like it had grown there. A Christmas wreath hung crookedly from the top, brittle and brown, ribbon frayed like it had been there for decades. The footprints ended right in front of it. My radio crackled at my shoulder, then went completely silent. I tried to call out, but got nothing back. No static. No response. Just dead air. I took a step closer to the door, heart hammering hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. Up close, I could see scorch marks along the bottom of the frame, blackened wood eaten away by fire. The smell hit me then, old smoke, faint but unmistakable. I turned to head back to the cruiser. That's when I realized I couldn't see the headlights anymore. The trees behind me were thicker than they'd been seconds ago, packed tight, branches interlocked. The clearing was gone. The road was gone. Snow fell in a perfect circle around me, straight down, silent. I stood there, flashlight shaking slightly in my hand, trying not to panic, telling myself this was shock or exhaustion or some kind of stress response. Then I heard her again. Not on the radio. Behind the door. She whispered my name, even though I hadn't given it. She asked if I'd come inside yet. I backed away until my heel caught something solid. Pavement. I looked down, and the road was there again under my feet. I stumbled backward, nearly falling, and everything snapped back at once. The cruiser lights blazing, engine humming, radio blaring my call sign over and over like they'd been yelling for me. I didn't answer right away. I just stood there, gasping, snow melting on my face. When I finally got my voice steady enough, I told dispatch I was back at my vehicle and asked them to run the address again. There was a pause on the line, longer than normal. Dispatch came back sounding different, quieter. The road name I'd given, they said, used to have a house at that pull-off. Burned down 30 years ago on Christmas Eve. Electrical fire. Family of 3. The mother had called 911, but the signal cut out before she could give a full address. By the time responders found the place, it was already gone. I looked toward the woods. There was no clearing, no door, no footprints, just untouched snow and trees standing the way they always had. Dispatch asked if I was okay. I told them I was fine. That's what you say when you don't want questions you can't answer. Back at the station, I filed my report and tried to write it like any other call. Incomplete address. Unable to locate. Cleared without contact. The system wouldn't let me close it. The call stayed open, highlighted on the screen, time counter still running. IT said it was a glitch. A known issue. They'd fix it after the holidays. That was years ago. I've worked a lot of Christmas shifts since then. Every year, just after midnight, I hear breathing on the radio when it's not my turn to talk. Sometimes I hear her whispering, asking if I'm close. The call never clears. It just waits patient as falling snow, somewhere between the trees, where a door once stood and someone is still listening for sirens that never came. Christmas shift usually meant quiet misery. Welfare checks on folks who didn't want company, the occasional drunk trying to drive home with a tree tied to their roof, radios humming low while the rest of the county slept it off. That night, snow had been falling since evening, light but steady, turning the world dull and soft around the edges. The station felt too big for the two of us on duty. Every sound echoed, boots on linoleum, the coffee pot clicking, the flag brushing the wall when the heater kicked on. Just after midnight, there was a knock at the front door. Not the buzzer. Not the radio. A knock. Slow and polite like someone raised right. I remember thinking how strange that felt, hearing it instead of seeing flashing lights pull into the lot. I grabbed my coat and opened the door, expecting maybe a stranded motorist or someone locked out in the cold. The man standing there looked wrong in a way I couldn't put my finger on right away. He was thin, shoulders sloped forward, wearing a threadbare wool coat that had lost its shape years ago. He held his hat in both hands, twisting the brim. Snow clung to his sleeves but hadn't melted. His face was pale, eyes red and glassy, like he'd been crying or hadn't slept in days. He smiled when he saw me, but it was too wide, too eager, like he was afraid I might shut the door again. He said his mother lived up at the old parish house on the ridge and hadn't answered her phone all day. Asked if I could give him an escort up there, just to check on her. His voice was calm, almost rehearsed, but it shook a little when he said, "Mother." I asked for his name. He gave it, but it slid right out of my head the moment after, like water off glass. The parish house had been on my beat for years. Old place, left over from when the church still had money. Retired clergy lived there sometimes, or widows who didn't want to leave the mountain. I told him to wait while I grabbed my keys. When I came back, he was still standing in the same spot, hat in his hands, smiling like he hadn't moved at all. We drove in silence. Snow muted the tires, and the road climbed higher, narrower, trees closing in on both sides. I tried making small talk, asked how long his mother had lived up there. He said a long time, and nothing else. When I glanced over, his eyes were fixed straight ahead, unblinking, reflecting the dash lights. The parish house sat dark at the end of the road, wreath still hanging crooked on the front door, red ribbon faded almost brown. No lights inside. No smoke from the chimney. The kind of quiet that feels intentional. We got out, the cold biting harder up there, and snow creaked softly under our boots. I knocked on the door and called out. No answer. I tried again, louder. Still nothing. I told him I'd circle the house, check for signs of a fall or a break-in. He nodded, still smiling, and said he'd wait by the door. The beam of my flashlight cut across the yard, catching on the snow. That's when I saw the footprints. 2 sets leading up to the house. Only 1 set leading back around the side with me. I stopped, stared at them longer than I should have, hoping my eyes were playing tricks on me. I called his name. My voice sounded small out there, swallowed by the trees. When I rounded the corner back to the front, the porch was empty. The door stood just as I'd left it. No new tracks in the snow. No sign anyone had walked away. The cold pressed in on me, sudden and sharp, and for the first time that night I felt something like fear. I drew my sidearm out of habit more than anything and tried the door. It opened easily. Inside, the air smelled old and sweet, like pine needles and dust, the kind of smell that clings to places no one's lived in properly for a while. The house was cold, but not abandoned cold. It felt kept. Somewhere upstairs, a Christmas hymn was playing. Soft, warped, like it was coming from a radio with dying batteries. It kept skipping back to the same line, over and over. I stood in the entryway listening, heart thudding, telling myself there had to be a rational explanation. A timer, an old tape player, someone with memory problems. I cleared the ground floor slowly. Living room neat, kitchen clean, dishes washed and stacked. A pot on the stove, empty but recently used. Everything in its place. The hymn drifted down the stairs, thin and distant. Upstairs, the hallway was narrow, carpet worn flat by decades of feet. The music came from the far bedroom. I announced myself again, my voice sounding too loud in my own ears. No response. The door was half open. The woman lay on the bed, covers pulled neatly up to her chest, hands folded. Her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, dry and unfocused. She'd been gone for a while. Long enough that the room felt settled around her absence. On the nightstand sat a framed photograph. A younger version of the man from the station, smiling in that same coat, arm around her shoulders. The date on the back read 20 years earlier. The hymn stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than the music had been. I stood there longer than I should have, throat tight, staring at that photo. I knew then that the man hadn't walked away into the snow. He hadn't come with me at all. Or maybe he had once a long time ago. I backed out of the room and nearly jumped out of my skin when the floor creaked behind me. The hallway was empty. The house felt different now, colder somehow, like it had noticed me noticing. I finished clearing the rooms and called it in, voice steady by force alone. Outside, the snow had stopped. My footprints were the only ones in the yard. Dispatch filled in the rest later, back at the station, voices hushed like we were in a church ourselves. 20 years ago, a man froze to death on that ridge on Christmas night. Knocked on doors asking for help after his car went off the road. Some folks said they heard him. Some said they opened the door and found no one there, just cold air rushing in. The parish house door closed behind me when I left, slow and gentle, like someone tucking in a child. As I walked back to the cruiser, I thought I heard singing again, faint and broken, drifting through the trees. Every Christmas since, when the snow starts to fall just right and the roads go quiet, I think about that knock on the station door. About a man holding his hat, smiling too hard, afraid to be turned away again. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the car, I swear I hear someone outside, waiting politely, hoping this time I'll open the door before the cold takes what little warmth he has left. I was parked on mile 7 because there wasn't much else to do. Christmas Eve had thinned the county out to almost nothing. No traffic, no calls, just long stretches of road and trees holding onto snow. I had the cruiser angled toward the downhill curve, headlights on low beam, watching flakes drift through the light like slow sparks. It was quiet enough that I could hear the ticking of the engine and the faint hiss of the heater. At some point, without any clear moment marking it, Christmas Eve became Christmas morning. The dash clock said 12:18, but it didn't feel like time had moved forward. It felt like it had stalled. The engine cut out without warning. No sputter, no shudder, just a clean, final silence. The heater died. The dash lights stayed on. For a few seconds, I sat there with my hands on the wheel, waiting for the noise to come back like it always does when something glitches. It didn't. I turned the key. Nothing. Tried again. Still nothing. I picked up the radio and called it in. My voice sounded normal when I spoke, but when the sound came back through the speaker, it was delayed by a second or two, stretched thin, like someone else was repeating what I'd said from a distance. Dispatch didn't answer. Just my own words coming back to me wrong. Snow thickened, or maybe it just felt that way with the engine dead and the lights dimmer than before. Mile 7 had always been a lonely stretch. Trees packed tight, drop-offs hidden by brush, the kind of road where mistakes stayed unfound for a while. I told myself to stay put, to keep the lights on and wait for a unit. That was the rule. But the quiet pressed in, heavy and close, and I felt exposed sitting there with no engine and no voices on the radio. That's when the pickup appeared. Its headlights came up behind me, yellow and low, and it pulled over at an angle with its hazard lights flashing. Relief hit me first, fast and warm. I stepped out, boots crunching on the snow, breath fogging thick in the air. A man climbed down from the truck, waving once. The glare from his headlights washed his face out, turning it into a pale blur. He asked if I needed a jump. His voice was flat, like he was reading from memory. I told him to stay back while I checked under the hood. Habit. Training. He nodded, but when I leaned into the engine bay and glanced up again, he was closer. Too close. Standing just behind my shoulder like he'd been there the whole time. I straightened up, heart jumping, and asked him to take a step back. He didn't. He tilted his head instead, studying me. His eyes were glassy, unfocused, reflecting light without holding it. His breath fogged the air, steady and thick, but his cheeks were red raw from cold, skin cracked. He asked me what day it was. I told him it was Christmas. The word felt strange leaving my mouth out there, swallowed by snow and trees. He laughed, short and sharp, a sound that didn't carry any warmth. Said he'd been driving since before Thanksgiving. Said he just couldn't seem to find where he was going. He pointed down the road, past my cruiser, into the dark. Asked if Mile 7 was past the bridge yet. There hadn't been a bridge on Mile 7 for years. I knew that. Everyone on the force knew that. The creek washed it out after a bad storm. Took 2 men with it when their truck went through in the dark. They'd rerouted traffic and never rebuilt. I told him that. He frowned like I'd given him the wrong answer to a question he'd been practicing. He stepped back then, just a half step, eyes drifting toward the trees. I asked him where he was headed, if he had a name, if he needed help. He didn't answer. He just kept staring down the road, lips moving slightly, like he was counting or reciting something under his breath. The cruiser started on its own. The engine roared back to life, loud and sudden enough to make me flinch. Headlights brightened. The radio crackled, a burst of static that almost sounded like relief. I looked back at the man. The pickup was gone. No headlights. No hazards. No tire tracks where it had pulled over. Just untouched snow and my cruiser idling like nothing had happened. I got back inside fast, locked the doors, hands shaking enough that I had to sit on them for a moment before I could key the mic. Dispatch answered this time, clear and normal, like the line had never been dead. I told them what happened, left out the parts that sounded wrong even to my own ears. They told me to return to the station. The drive back felt longer than it should have. Every mile marker made me uneasy. I caught myself watching the rear view more than the road, half expecting those yellow headlights to bloom out of the dark again. They didn't. At the station I wrote it up. Engine stall. Unknown motorist. Possible confusion due to weather conditions. The usual language that keeps things neat. But something nagged at me. After I finished, I went down to records and started digging. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for until I found it. A report from 1998. Christmas night. Mile 7. Stranded motorist. Male. Disoriented. Asking responders what day it was. Asked repeatedly if the bridge was ahead. Last seen waiting by his truck while help was called in. When units arrived, he was gone. The truck was found abandoned farther down the road days later. half buried in snow. The description stopped me cold. Height, build, red, weathered face. The coat. I went back upstairs feeling hollow. Told myself coincidence didn't mean anything. That roads collect stories and people start fitting new faces into old shapes. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been trying to finish a conversation that started a long time ago. The diagnostics came back clean the next day. No record of the engine failure. No glitch in the radio system. Everything working as designed. That should have been the end of it. But late at night, when I'm on a quiet stretch and the snow falls just right, the radio does something strange. Sometimes, when I key the mic, I hear my voice answer back before I speak. Not an echo. Not static. Just a breath and a pause, like someone waiting for me to remember what I was supposed to say. Once, on mile 7, I heard a man ask softly if the bridge was close. I didn't answer. I kept driving, eyes forward, hands tight on the wheel, pretending the road hadn't looped back on itself again. Christmas night always stretches thin toward morning. By the time the sky starts to lighten, everyone's patience is gone and the radio chatter turns brittle. That was where we were when we found him, just before dawn, wandering the shoulder of the highway like he'd stepped out of a different year. Snow lined the ditch and glittered under the cruiser lights. He had no shoes on, no coat worth mentioning, just a thin sweater and pants stiff with cold. He was singing to himself, off-key and slow, like he was trying to remember the tune as he went. We eased up beside him, expecting panic or confusion. Instead, he smiled. Not wide or forced, just pleasant, like he was glad to see company. When I asked where his shoes were, he looked down at his feet as if surprised, then laughed softly and said he must have misplaced them. No ID. No wallet. He asked if we'd put up a Christmas tree at the station yet. Said it like it mattered. He didn't resist when we offered him a ride. Didn't shiver, either. His skin was cold when I helped him into the back seat, colder than it should have been, but his hands were steady. He hummed the rest of the way, voice drifting in and out, catching on wrong notes. I told myself he was drunk or hypothermic, that people act strange when they're cold enough. I didn't like how calm he was. At the station, I sat him in the holding cell with a blanket and a cup of water. He thanked me, careful and polite, and asked again about the tree. I told him we didn't have one. He nodded like that was fine, like he'd expected it. As I shut the door, he started humming again, quieter now, a single thin line of sound. The station settled back into its usual late-night rhythm. Fluorescent lights buzzed. The coffee tasted burnt. The other deputy dozed at the desk. I was halfway through paperwork when I heard singing. Not humming. Singing. Soft harmonies, layered, more voices than one. It drifted up from the cell block, slow and gentle, the kind of sound that creeps under your skin before your brain catches up. I stood there listening, pen frozen in my hand, telling myself it had to be the radio or someone's phone. But the sound moved, shifting down the hall, growing clearer. I pulled up the camera feed. The holding cell was empty. For a long second, I thought the system had glitched. Then I checked the other angles. Empty. Blanket folded on the bench like no one had been there at all. The singing drifted closer, now coming from the hallway itself, echoing faintly off concrete and cinder block. My heart stayed steady, but my chest felt tight, like the air had thinned without warning. I got up and followed the sound. Every step felt deliberate, measured, like I was walking into something that had already decided how it would go. The singing led me past the lockers, past the interview rooms, toward the older part of the building we didn't use much anymore. The lights flickered there, always had. The door to the old records room stood open. The singing swelled as I reached it, close enough that I could feel it vibrating in my ribs. It wasn't loud. It was intimate, like it was meant for the space inside my chest. I stepped inside and the sound wrapped around me, coming from everywhere at once. The shelves were lined with boxes, cardboard yellowed with age, labels handwritten and fading. This room held what the fire hadn't taken decades back. Cases no one looked at unless they had to. The smell of old paper and smoke clung to everything. My flashlight beam shook slightly as I moved it across the rows. That's when I saw the photo. It was taped to the front of a file, curling at the corners. A group of people stood in front of a church bus, bundled in coats, smiling at the camera. Volunteer carolers, the caption read, Christmas 1976. I recognized the story as soon as I saw the date. The bus slid off an icy road coming down the mountain. They never found everyone. Some said the creek took them. Some said the woods did. The singing filled the room, no longer drifting but present, surrounding me. I could pick out individual voices now. Men and women, different ages, all steady and calm. I stood there, frozen, staring at the faces in the photo. One of them wore a familiar sweater. Another had the same gentle smile I'd seen in the holding cell. I don't remember deciding to leave the room. I just remember being back in the hallway, the singing fading as suddenly as it had come. The lights steadied. The station sounds crept back in. My legs felt weak, like I'd walked too far on ice. When I checked the cameras again, the man was back in the cell. He lay on the bench, blanket tucked around his shoulders, eyes closed like he was asleep. The cup of water sat on the floor where I'd left it. The timestamp showed he'd been there the whole time. No gaps. No flickers. Nothing to explain what I'd seen. I stood there for a long time, watching him breathe. Slow. Shallow. Too quiet. I didn't wake him. I didn't say anything to the other deputy. I finished the shift like I always did. Hands moving through routine on muscle memory alone. At sunrise, when the sky turned pale and the snow stopped falling, the cell was empty again. No alarms. No open doors. No footage of him leaving. The blanket lay folded just like before. The water cup was empty, a thin rim of frost clinging to the inside like it had been drained in deep cold. I touched it and pulled my hand back fast. It burned. We filed the report the only way we could. Unknown male. Possible exposure. Walked off before sunrise. The kind of paperwork that explains nothing and satisfies everyone who doesn't want answers. I thought about that photo all day. About voices traveling together. About people who disappear in the mountains and don't always stay gone. I still work Christmas shifts. Every year, just past dawn, when the station goes quiet and the lights buzz a little louder, I hear it again. Carols, soft and patient. Drifting from the halls we don't use anymore. I don't follow them now. I sit still and listen, telling myself they're just echoes, just memory. But sometimes, I swear I hear a voice asking if we ever put up that tree.